I am. Okay, good. Uh-huh. Okay. Welcome to all of you. I'm looking for a post right now that I wanted to start with from a friend of mine. Here it is. Okay. So welcome to those of you who are viewing from afar, and welcome to all of you that are here on a cold, dark night. We're going to do about 45 minutes again. We did not meet for our typical classes, and all of a sudden, as of the last few days, we find our country dealing with the chaos in the Middle East. And I want us to begin with just a powerful writing. Harding University Graduate School of Religion professor shared this week, actually shared yesterday, 18 hours ago. And I want that to set the tone for what we're doing here. So let me begin with this reading, and then I will continue with a prayer. This by Carlos Gupton. Tonight, there is a young mother in the U.S. who, although she swells with pride over her strong warrior husband and respects the choice he made to be a skilled military officer, still feels rushes of deep anxiety at the thought of the love of her life, the father of her precious children, potentially risking his life overseas. There is an Iranian father who would like nothing more than for his family to live together in their peaceful village without the fear of war or oppression. There is a little Iraqi brother and sister who have just been prayed over by their parents as they drift asleep. None of these people make the decisions of warfare, but they are no different than the millions of us who see this recent escalation and sigh a deep why over it all. And join me in this prayer. Lord, wield mightily the instruments of your peace. We are discerning enough to know that evil at times must feel the force of strength. And we are humble enough to realize that others have greater intelligence regarding world affairs, and yet righteous enough to stand aghast at the bluster and warmongering. Please make our leaders, the leaders of our nation and the leaders of other nations, wise unto peace. We know you control the sea, the air, and the ground, and that army missiles are but a candle puff against your righteous breath. And so we beg you to humble all who are proud, to correct every wrong, to restore the plight of all who suffer injustice. But please, Lord, may it happen without another drop of blood, without the shedding of another tear. We would long for not one more surgical strike, not one step of ground combat. Please spare the lives of all who are deployed from all sides, as even our enemies are our neighbors. May calm deliberation prevail and stab the dreadful risk of brinksmanship. Please, O Lord, we pray for peace. Peace for all. Amen. Anytime you talk about the Middle East, you are talking about an area that is ripe for conflict, ripe for war. And so in the midst of, or out of the midst of that scenario, comes the Prince of Peace, comes our Jesus. And Jesus obviously is called the Prince of Peace because he knew what it was like for people to war against each other, for people to fight against each other. So, first of all, some of you that are viewing from afar have mentioned to me that you have not been able to find our second class on our YouTube channel. We're working on that. We think we still have it, but for some reason it didn't get posted to the site. So we hope to have that up in the next few days. Welcome to class number 4 of our series. You are, via this class, and so you don't have to worry about chaos and craziness putting your personal body into jeopardy as you do a Holy Land trip this way. I'm often asked, what is your favorite part, or what has been your favorite part of the Holy Land trip? And in the first 2 weeks, we had several of the people that were in this church actually give kind of an overview of what were their highlights and what were special things for them. And even more particular, why do you want to go again? Well, you've already been, so why are you wanting to go a second time? And I want to, since I was doing most of the teaching, I didn't answer the question for myself. So I want to take just a couple minutes here to say, why, Dan? Why do you keep going? And what is it that is so intriguing and enamoring in your travels in the Holy Land? And I will say this, parts of Israel, specifically parts of Jerusalem, are always very, very high on my favorites list. Being in the Garden of Gethsemane, where we know, there in the Kidron Valley, we know beyond any shadow of a doubt, Jesus was there. And you sit among the olive trees, and you have quiet, solemn time in that same garden where Jesus prayed. That is one of the special things for me. To visit the garden tomb, either the tomb or a tomb very similar to where Jesus' body was laid, and to take communion there is one of the very solemn places. But what we're talking about tonight, and I could go on, but I'm not going to tonight. What we're talking about tonight is really the country of Jordan, the land of the NABATAEANS. That's this word right here, Steve, if you can go along with it. And what happened in Petra, the introduction of the MOSAICs, Mount Hor. Oops, I didn't intend to read that, to do that. Mount NEBO, and we're going to see some pictures there, and then time around the Dead Sea. Those are what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, we've continued to shift a little bit, to shift what's happening with our calendar, because, quite frankly, I talk too much, or I plan too much material in too short of a time. So, we've kind of pushed this down a little bit, and so today, here we are, January the This is the area that we're talking about tonight. Jordan, Petra, Mount Nebo, and the Dead Sea. Okay? So, by the way, one of the in petrographics from the 3rd century BC, rock drawings by camel caravan men. We discovered these at Wadi Rum. And this is actually one of the sites we've only visited once in the past. And God willing, our next trip will go there again. And we will once again spend some time there. And you've seen this trade routes before. You've seen this slide before, but I want to talk a little bit more about it. Caravans would travel from Yemen to Syria. So from right down in here on the bottom, a caravan would come right up this way, over through here, through Damascus, through modern-day Jordan, this road on the right, and they would make their way on north. And so what we're going to be looking at what we just looked at was an area right along in here, this Wadi Rum right here. And these pyroglyphics, you'll see a camel, you can see an ostrich, and we will once again on our next trip actually be able to stop there. One man on these caravans would lead 3 camels, and on a typical trip, there would be 300 men leading about 1,000 camels. And these camels this is the way they traded. This is the way they carried goods from one location to another. And this would have been, along around the time of Israel, probably the time of King David. Keep in mind, Israel is a little bit further on over here to the left. It bumps right up to the Mediterranean Sea, and the Wadi Rum is in modern-day Jordan, which is what we're going to be talking about mostly today. So there's always some fun stops. You can buy your souvenirs. There's Dan the preacher man with a little head covering that I bought while I was there. And here's Catherine on our first trip. If you want to ride a camel, you'll be able to ride a camel. Usually Arab boys, little boys, this is their way of making money. And for $1 or $5, you'll be able to get up and do a camel ride. And you can do that in either Israel or Jordan. One of the highlights, and we're going to talk about at least my personal favorites from the Jordan part of our trip today. One of the highlights was going to Petra. And I had never heard of Petra before our first trip there, because it's not explicitly, directly mentioned in Scripture. It is in the area where the NABATAEANS traveled. It was on one of the major trade routes, and so they might well have done trade with the Jews that were living in Jerusalem. But there is this very, very unique spot in modern-day Jordan, or in Jordan of antiquity, that is called Petra. That's the name of the region, that's the name of the place. And there's this just very, very, very little narrow passageway. It's called an SIQ, which is pronounced Seek, like we would say S-E-E-K. And so we're going to be showing this Seek, which is about a mile long from the main entrance on down into the area that we're most interested in. So here is part of our group traveling through the Seek. Sometimes it was only as much as, or as little as 10 or 12 feet wide. And you can imagine, if your enemy was attacking you, there were huge cliffs all around. This is the only way to get into this hidden city. This is the only way. You had quite a position, because the defenders of this city could be up 100 feet, 200 feet below them and just drop rocks or whatever they wanted to, hot oil, on the people that were trying to enter the city. And so here we are coming on down. Here I am, like right in here, looking straight up, and this is looking straight up towards the sky over here, the Seek at Petra. And in that area, as in much of the Middle East, what is the major problem? We don't have enough water. And so everywhere there were rocks that they could somehow trap water and divert water, this is exactly what they do. And so even inside the Seek, there are water channels that guide the water that flows when it comes once or twice or three times a year into big cisterns, so that when it came time to collect water, they didn't have wells that were drilled. They could go and crank it up. They had to collect water naturally, and there wasn't an abundance of water around. They would even carve out of the side of the rock a place to collect the water, and then it would once again run down into cisterns. And so here we are walking again inside the Seek, 10 to 12 feet wide, maybe about as wide as this podium is in some places, and it's a mile from one end to the other end. And people always ask, well, what about if you don't feel like walking? Well, there are other ways. There is one other way. And the only other way is you can jump on a cart. And in the cart, which, again, typically the Arab boys will drive, pulling a donkey, you will bounce your way all the way down to the area that we're actually getting to. And here's again one of those Seeks that is carved right out of the stone wall. And so here's what you find when you get to the bottom. The main thing as you enter the end is, this is called the Treasury building. What can I say? You can see a little bit of restoration work that's been done right in here and right in here. Here again, maybe it's a better picture. Here's Catherine in the foreground here. And this is usually actually off to one side. There will be camels that if you want to do your camel ride down there, while other people are looking around, you can do your camel ride. And the NABATAEAN tombs were all over this area. And so when you had a child that was born, one of the first things you were going to do is start building their tomb. And so this is what the NABATAEANS and then those who followed. By the way, somebody might ask, well, if it was so hard to get there into where the people were, how did the Romans, because the Roman army came and took this city, how did they actually finally overtake the city? And there is much speculation. The bottom line is nobody knows for sure, but the guess, probably the best guess, is that they poisoned would overtake. This is where it was filmed, right here. Not right here, but at the Treasury building. More of the NABATAEAN tombs. There were, of course, group tombs, and then there were individual tombs. If you had a lot of money, you might build your own tomb. And this would be a one-person tomb. This is all in Petra. More of the carved out of sandstone, more of the awesome beauty there at Petra. Another individual tomb. An unfinished structure you can barely make out. Either it was unfinished or it had been highly exposed, and so it looks like it's not finished, and maybe the wind and rain and other things that happen carved away at the outside structure, though it was beautiful at one time. So here's the entryway from the Sikh, and the first thing you see is just a little glimpse of the Treasury building. And then you come on down, and here's the full Treasury building. Oh yeah, there the camels are. This is a different trip, and this is where if you want to take a camel ride and even pose for a picture with on top of a camel in front of the Treasury. So just have discovered, off the way, several hundred yards. And so they would have their plays, they would have their big meetings. So you can see the seats here, and this would have been the stage right up here in the foreground, an amphitheater in Pittman, and or in Petra, not Pittman. And here's Catherine and Carol Bailey. They were on this particular trip, and we stopped our tour bus because there was a little gentleman there by the side of the road serving tea. So we had a refreshment stop. And one of the things that you're cautioned about, pretty much anywhere you go in the world, but definitely in the Middle East, along the road is don't drink the water. Because, well, why don't you drink the water, Jay? Yeah, there's all kinds of bugs and other things in there, and if you think the flu is bad, well, stuff we Americans can get in our system from water we drink there can be very bad. I don't know that it's life-threatening, but it'll make you not want to leave the bathroom, okay? So if you get the drift. And so we stopped there at this little roadside stand, posed for pictures and viewed the amazing scenery. And we asked our guide, is it okay for us to drink the water? His statement was, if the water has been boiled, it's okay. Does that make sense? If the water has been boiled, yeah. What I discovered was the water had gotten hot, but it had not been boiled, because a matter of a few hours after posing or stopping for this site, my stomach started getting agitated, and I won't give you any more pictures. But you want to be sure that not only is the water hot, but the water has been boiled so that any critters that might have been in the water that would make you sick have been killed. So we're next going to talk a little bit about mosaics. And some of the mosaics would go back to the 3rd century before Christ, or the BCE, as we've talked about in the very first class that we had. BCE is the description used because many people do not want to acknowledge the existence of Christ, or at least the way that we do. The BCE is the before the Common Era, and so it means the same thing as BC and AD, but you've got actually CE for Common Era, which is the time that we live in, and BCE is before the Common Era. One of the big things in the country of Jordan, they don't have a whole lot to offer. So one of the big things that they do is mosaics, and they sell the mosaics to tourists. Queen Noor, in fact, of Jordan, established a mosaics art center to help handicapped citizens. A very noble, a very wise thing. Handicapped citizens can't use their legs, maybe are paralyzed. Well, what can they do? They can do mosaics, and we'll see some of that a little bit later. In fact, there's a whole shop that has been established, at least one. This is the one that we visited. There may be more, that is supplemented by the Jordanian government to give their handicapped citizens a place to work. And so here are a couple of them right here. This was, for lack of a better word, probably a salesperson who was not one of the ones who necessarily made the mosaics, but this whole section right beside her is a mosaic that they were trying to sell to as a souvenir to tourists. And who knows how much time this one would have taken here. Hundreds of hours to put together all these little pieces. And here is another that is simply being painted in the way that they could have painted them during the earlier centuries. And here's an example of a gentleman making a mosaic. In fact, you can see it right here is one that he is making that he hopes some tourist, whether American or from some other country, will buy. And this is what you know about mosaics. You need to know there are tiny pieces of stone, ceramics, and glass that are all strategically pieced together to create artwork. They are cut. If they haven't found them the right size, they will cut them, and then they're placed in a pattern. The stones are placed upside down in a frame on a large board, and then they are flipped over when it comes time so that the person that actually is looking at the mosaic only sees the smooth surfaces. And as you can imagine, it's a very tedious and time-consuming work. One of the great collections is in MADABA and St. George's Greek Church. This is a Greek Orthodox church, actually from about the 4th century. And so here you see it. This was a relatively simple one. Relatively large pieces of stone, all the same color that you see about here, with some darker pieces of stone. And this, again, handmade, piece by piece, and you can imagine the time that something like this would take. Here is they're called the MADABA map. The total length of it is 60 feet by 20 feet, some 2 million pieces of stone. Today they're estimated and that it probably took about 11,000 hours to build, 2.5 years to complete. So this became, it's kind of like today where an artist will take dozens or hundreds of hours to create a piece, maybe a painting of Jesus or some other historic event, and it's kind of their way of reverencing that moment or reverencing that person. And that's very much like what the mosaics are. Here is another angle of the mosaic of the MADABA map, which actually take off sand or take off maybe a building that was built on top of that because they didn't know what it was when they first built it. Well, the mosaics get damaged. And so there are professionals, kind of like furniture restorers, that will go in and restore a mosaic. And here's a gentleman working to restore a mosaic. Here in just a moment. I'm talking so fast without my notes. When it comes to my notes, I have to get to them. So, land of Egypt, on the first day of the 5th month, Numbers 33, 38, and 39, and Aaron was 123 years old. We did not actually go there to the top of it. This is about as close as we got, and so we took a picture from our tour bus of this site. But I know, because we stole some pictures, this is what it looks like up on the top, and it is now a mosque because the Muslims also look to it as a sacred site. Okay, not nearly as exciting to me, or much more exciting to me than Mount Hor, was Mount Nebo. Read this one with me. Deuteronomy chapter 34. You remember the story. If you know anything about the Bible, about the Old Testament, Moses went up to the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo. Because time is an issue, I'm not going to ask for class participation, but I'll capsulize the story. Moses led the people of Israel for 40 years through the wilderness of God because of his sin. you may lead the people, but you may not go into the land, the promised land, the land of Israel. So he led the people to the land, and then I will ask this one. Who took over for Moses? Anybody remember that? Corey? Joshua took over. And so what we're reading about right here is right in that situation. So Moses went up to the plains of Moab, to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him all of the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea. The western sea is the Mediterranean Sea. So and Moses got to look at all of that. And the Lord said to him, this is the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you and to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, modern-day Jordan, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. And as so often happens, even today, somebody decided we need to build a monument. And so that's exactly what happened. So we visited the monument where supposedly Moses was buried on Mount Nebo. And there's actually a church there today. And we even visited the church. And mosaics there, because it was such a holy site. And what do you do if you have a holy site? You build something, or you form something artistically that says, this is a sacred site. And so another extremely impressive and large mosaic built on the floor of the church. Scholars are estimating this happened in about the 4th century AD or CE. Use whatever nomenclature you want. Moses' bronze serpents. Remember, one of the plagues God sent is that he sent snakes there to destroy the people in the wilderness because they disobeyed God. And everyone who looked upon the golden serpent would be healed. And so there is a symbol of that event right here, and you visit that on the top of Mount Nebo. Last time we were here, we had several doctors that were visiting with us, and they were very intrigued. Oh yeah, this serpent is the sign of modern-day medicine, even to this day. So that was kind of cool. Okay, now we're moving to the Dead Sea. So we're about to transfer from modern-day Jordan, Petra, the NABATAEANS, across the Jordan River, across the Dead Sea, into modern-day Israel. We're going to get that. So what can you tell us about the Dead Sea, Dan? Well, no animal or plant life lived there. None. Zero. No, there is some algae. There is some bacteria. It is 1,388 feet below sea level. That's the top of the Dead Sea. It's Earth's lowest elevation of land anywhere in the earth. Anywhere. There are no exceptions. This is the lowest. At places, it is as much as 1,200 feet deep. The salinity is 34%. So think it's 1/3 salt, which is 10 times saltier than the oceans. So it is extremely salty. Yes? You can swim in it. We're going to show you pictures of it. Even if you can't swim, you can swim in it. You can't go down. I didn't do this, but my father, when he was there, because they lived there for 2 years, he took the biggest boulder he could find, laid that on a back float, and laid it on the top of his chest, and he still wouldn't sink. No. So it's a pretty amazing place. And the main line to feed the Dead Sea is the Jordan River. That's the main way that it gets fed. And there's a real problem with that. We're going to get to this in just a moment, because about 90% of the Jordan River today is drained off for irrigation. So it never makes it there to where it used to make it. And so the Dead Sea is getting more dead and is getting smaller because it has no fresh water supply today. So when you get to the Dead Sea, whether you're on the Jordanian side or on the Israeli side, you will see this sign. Basically says, do not jump or dive into the water. Enter until you can squat, then lie back gently. Do not immerse your head. Do not splash water on yourself or others. Do not drink seawater. If you swallow the water, request help from the lifeguard or the first aid provider. Consuming water frequently. In other words, you don't want that in your system because it's so salty. Then usage of the beach. And the very first thing, this sign doesn't say that, the very first thing you do once you get out of the Dead Sea is just like kind of a lot of our beaches along the Jersey Shore, you get a shower in fresh water to rise. So some say, what does it feel like? The best description I ever heard is it feels like baby oil with salt in it when you get out, or sand in it. It's smooth, it feels gritty, but with like you got oil in it. Oil with grit. That's what it feels like, yeah. And so back to the question earlier, here's some of our people that were with us on this trip that don't know how to swim, couldn't swim, but they could lay back. In fact, some of you may know some of these people. Jim and Carol Bailey were here. A couple from the King of Prussia Church. Who do I see? Oh, there's Judy Campbell. You might see her Sunday morning. I don't recognize any of the others right here that are... Joyce Johnson is here. Yeah, so anyway. And one of the things we've never talked about yet in this group is the food. You are on a tour group, and so you'll have great meals, great breakfast, usually served in the hotel that you stay in. And in fact, is this? Yeah, this is a breakfast meal that we're helping ourselves to right here. And the same is true with dinners. The dinners are in a large dining area. Lunches we do, pretty much all the tour groups do the same. Lunches are on your own. You're out on a tour bus and you come to a stop. You don't know how fast all the stops are going to be. The breakfast and dinner are always included in the tour price. But the lunches, because you don't know how they're going to be, or where you're going to be, people just pay for their own. Usually, well, sometimes people don't want them because they had a big lunch and they know they're going to have a big dinner, so you get a Coke. And yes, there's Coke. Other times people, I'm ready to eat again, so you can spend $10 or $15 or even $20 if you want to, and yes, they do take U.S. dollars. So, as you make the trip crossing from Jordan to Israel, or vice versa, there are some, in fact, any border that you have, that you cross, in which there are potential enemies on one side of the border and the other side of the border. Number one, be patient. They're going to be extremely thorough. They're going to be very, very cautious. Even though you know you're a good guy, you know you don't have any bombs, you know you don't have any evil intent. So be patient. Number two, particularly when you're with a group, your bus goes together, so that makes it a little bit easier to go through with your customs group. I can't emphasize this strongly enough. These guards at the borders do not want their pictures taken. Do not. We had a lady that took some. The guard, in no time, the guard is the guard is up on the bus, wants to see her camera, and he deletes. You delete that. He doesn't want to see his picture there. So no pictures. Always be willing, able to show your passport. You may not have to show a passport, but you always need to be willing and ready to show the passport. At the border crossings, it's probably the most you're going to work on the whole trip. Is everybody has to carry their own luggage. Nobody's going to help you with your luggage. So the more bags you take with you, the more things you're going to have to cover and carry, from the equivalent of from one side of our building to another as you go through kind of a no man's land, particularly as you cross from Jordan to Israel or vice versa. And so you will be responsible for your own luggage. Everything that you're carrying with you from one place to the next, you're responsible for. And I would say this too. It's okay to be intimidated. It is an intimidating process when you see these guys with guns on their side and Uzis or other kinds of big guns. They're doing their job. And so border crossings are always a little bit intimidating. And then I would also say, one of the questions that you will be asked, just like anytime you travel in a plane, did anybody give you anything to carry? And you better say no. And you better not have, because that's one of the things that they are obviously very, very most concerned about, is not necessarily smuggling things, but somebody taking something and sending it by way of tourists that they don't want crossing the border, okay? So what's going to happen next week? Well, next week in our class, we're going to finally make it to Israel. Yes, we are. And so here is Catherine, and from our trip in 1986, we had just moved to Pittman about a year before this, and I led my trip there. And a lady that traveled with us on that trip, Shirley Rowe, as we posed for pictures outside of Jerusalem. So one of the first places we will visit is Jericho. So what are we going to talk about next week? Qumran, and we're going to show pictures of Qumran, the community that lived there. We're going to talk a little bit more, just a little bit. We've talked enough about that already, about the Dead Sea Scrolls, about the fortress at Masada, the Judean wilderness. Remember, after Jesus' baptism, your Bible says that Satan took him into the wilderness to be tempted. That was the Judean wilderness. We will go to, most think, this baptismal site where Jesus was baptized and many others were baptized, Bethany beyond the Jordan. And in fact, God willing, we might even have several people with us on our tour that are going to be baptized there. So after Jesus' baptism at Bethany beyond the Jordan, which means the eastern part of the Jordan, it's right in the middle of the Judean wilderness. And so Satan tempts Jesus with the temptations that you've all read about. And then En-Gedi, you may not know much about En-Gedi, is a place we've never visited before. Catherine and I have never visited. And En-Gedi is like an oasis. This is where David, when he was fleeing from Saul, this is where David hid out. There was a supply of fresh water. This is where David cut off part of Saul's garments. Remember, he was not going to kill one of God's appointed or anointed, which Saul was. And so I'm really excited about this. And those of you who want to walk or hike, there is a short walk, a medium-sized walk, and then a longer walk going back to waterfalls and kind of, for lack of a better word, an oasis in the middle of the desert. I think that's it. Oh, here's a picture of the guy that we're hoping to have next time. I've been in touch with him, though I thought I had this link down, and for sure a done deal. I got an email from him today and said, Dan, I've got another group, and I'm not sure I'm going to be with you on the whole group. I've got 3 days with another group. So Sam is a devoted believer. I think he would probably be considered something like an Orthodox Christian. They would have more religious garb, or his clergy would, but very, very much a believer. He is called a Jerusalemite. He is an Arab that was born in Jerusalem and has lived in Jerusalem all of his life. Was he our guide, Jay, when you were there? Yeah, so, yeah. Good guide. Would you agree? Yep. So, anyway, I think that's our last slide, if I remember. Yeah. Oh, and that's the little write-up for you, Steve, when that time comes. So, do you have any questions, comments, anything you'd like to say? Hey, Dan, I want to ask a question. We're good. We're 40 minutes. Yeah. I intentionally cut back. Okay, a little bit more. I was afraid I was going to run out of time, so I didn't say all I wanted to about why I keep going back. How many of you have been to Ground Zero since the World Trade Centers came down? How many? Yeah. Why do you go there? Sherry, why do you go there? Oh, you had a project. You had a job there. Hey, not all of us had, but a lot of us go there even though we don't have a job there. So what is it that draws you to Gettysburg or to Ground Zero? Pardon? It's an interesting. Why is it interesting? Yeah. It's significant. Yeah. But something significant happened there. And there's something very emotional about being at a place where a significant happening took place. And so one of the reasons that I like to keep going back to Israel and to Jordan is because you know you are walking where Jesus walked. You are walking where the Apostle Paul walked. You are walking where David walked. As you walk into Bethlehem, you are walking in the city of David. This is where David was from, Bethlehem. And there's just something very special about that. And so when you read your Bible, whether Old Testament or New Testament, you can say in your head, I was there. I was there. The Valley of Elah, where David and Goliath fought. I'm not sure that we'll stop there this time, but that's another place. You were in the Valley of Elah. Steve? The video is what? Oh, it's back on. Oh, okay, okay. Well, we thought we finished, but we didn't quite. So, okay. So that's what we're looking forward to. Oh, that one. Okay, good. To those of you who are viewing from afar, I'm just now informed by our IT guy, who is a miracle work. The video that was not posted earlier from December 11th, class number 2, is now on our website, so you can stream that if you'd like to, okay? You know what? I think that's enough for us today. For once, Dan will get done before the very last minute. Thank you, Steve, for recording. Thank you for being here, and we'll consider ourselves dismissed. Boom. Okay.